I recently relocated, and now I'm in Guelph, Ontario, which is near Toronto, but still traveling around Canada doing outreach and working with the Canadian government. So that's a bit of background on who I am and what the Planetary Society does. Our other big claim to fame is that we were founded by Carl Sagan, along with a couple of other co-founders, and we're now led by Bill Nye. So we have a couple of the sort of heavy hitters of space and science outreach on our side. So I guess, yeah, what I'd like to talk to you guys about today is Lightsail. So I'm actually going to, if this works, I'm going to share my screen and go into a slideshow about Lightsail. So if ever I start glitching or something's not working, just make some noise and I'll hear you, hopefully. So yeah, Lightsail is this really interesting project that the Planetary Society has been working on for the past decade or so. And basically it is using the sun's light to propel a spacecraft. So it's sailing like a regular sailboat sails on the wind, but it's instead of on the wind, it's on sunlight. So, oh yeah, this is us, the Planetary Society. Our mission is empowering the world's citizens to advance space science and exploration. So, what is solar sailing and why do we need it? So, normally when you launch a spacecraft into space, the rocket that carries it into space gives it most of its momentum. And then once it's, oh sorry, I'm just making sure that that's not you talking to me saying that oh, I didn't share the screen. Thank you. Okay. Now I pressed the last button. Thank you very much for that heads up. Okay. You're working now?
Yes.
Okay, so I'll go back to the first slide. Oh, geez, Louise. Sorry. Okay, here we go. So this is what Lightsail looks like. So moving on. This is not what Lightsail looks like. This is what solar sailing might look like. So yeah, normally a spacecraft is launched into orbit. The rocket gives it a ton of momentum. Once it's out in space, there's no air, there's no atmosphere to slow it down, so it'll just keep coasting using the momentum that the rocket gave it. Most spacecraft carry on them some extra propellant and some jets so that it can, or some engines, so that it can speed itself up even more once it's in space, especially if it's going somewhere far away, or to adjust its trajectory if it needs to go into orbit around Earth or into orbit around another planet. The drawback to this is that fuel is heavy, and you need to make space for it on your spacecraft. So particularly if you're looking to have a smaller spacecraft, carrying all of that propellant and engines takes away from the space that you could otherwise use for science instruments and that kind of thing. Also, the heavier the spacecraft is, the more expensive it is to launch. So carrying a bunch of heavy fuel isn't ideal. And then finally, of course, you will eventually run out of that fuel. So if you're trying to set sail or set course for, say, something, you can only really accelerate for a limited amount of time. And from there, you just have to coast. So the advantage of solar sailing is that it gives you continuous acceleration. So it captures the sun's energy and uses that to push the spacecraft forward. And I'll explain how that works specifically in a minute. But basically the idea is that you don't have to carry fuel on board and you're never going to run out of fuel. The sun, as long as you are within the solar system, you're always going to have sunlight pushing on you, so you're going to be continuously accelerating. Oh, sorry, my cat just knocked something large. This is the problem of working from home. Anyhow, moving on. So, how does solar sailing work? So the sun's light is made of photons. And these are particles that don't have any mass, but they do have energy and momentum. So when they hit this sail, which is a highly reflective, very, very thin material, ours is made out of mylar, but other materials are also possible. When it hits that sail, it pushes on the sail just ever so slightly. It also reflects off the sail because it's shiny like a mirror. So like the light reflecting up a mirror shows you a reflection, the sun's light reflecting off of the sail gives it a double push. So it pushes it once when it hits it and once when it bounces back off again. So you can use this, the most straightforward way to use this is to have something that is just being pushed directly away from the sun. So as the photons push it, it just moves away from the sun. But you can also, like a sailboat, you can sort of tack to move in different directions. So solar sailing is an idea that's been around for a very long time. It actually, the first mention of the concept dates back to Johann Kepler writing a letter to Galileo Galilei in 1608. He had realized that when you see a comet with a tail falling behind it, that is caused by sunlight heating material from the comet's surface. So the idea that the sun's light could interact with an object and actually change it in some way kind of gave Kepler this idea that a space sail might one day be able to capture sunlight. He said in his letter to Galileo that humans might one day use this technology to set a course for the stars. So since then, there have been a lot of proposals for how you might harness the sun's energy using solar sails. And one of the first prominent ideas was to build an enormous solar sailing spacecraft that would fly to Halley's Comet, which was actually the very same comet that Kepler first got his idea from observing. So one of the Planetary Society's co-founders, Louis Friedman, actually worked on this proposal, which was several decades ago, which was for the spacecraft that you see on this slide. So this would have 12 long sails that were each 4 miles long. But of course, building something with sails 4 miles long is very ambitious and ultimately turned out to be too ambitious, and so it never happened. But the idea did not die there. It was something that stuck in the minds of the people who've been working on it, including one of our other co-founders, Carl Sagan. And in this kind of, excuse me, this kind of blurry photo you see is still from Carl Sagan on the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, describing and showing a model of a solar sail and talking about how this technology might be possible someday. So finally, another couple decades later in 1999, the Russian government came to the Planetary Society, and being led by Louis Friedman and Carl Sagan, two of the real advocates for solar sailing, and offered an opportunity for us to launch a spacecraft for free on one of their rockets. So the idea of building some kind of spacecraft through crowd-funded systems was something that the Planetary Society had been considering for a long time, because we are a crowd-funded organization. We depend on members around the world to fund our activities. So the Planetary Society took this opportunity and ran with it and started a program for a spacecraft called Cosmos 1 that would have 8 triangular sails and would not fly all the way out to Halley's Comet or anything like that, but go into orbit around the Earth to just test the technology, test if solar sailing was possible. So this is Louis Friedman, our co-founder, standing next to the body of the Cosmos 1 spacecraft. So this actually, over the course of 6 years, this project was funded and was built and became a reality. So this was a spacecraft with each sail being 15 meters long, and each one could be individually tilted, which would allow the sail to control its direction much more than if they were unable to be tilted. It could track the sun as it went around the Earth. In 2005, the Cosmos spacecraft was launched by the Russians as promised. What you see on the left is an artist's depiction of what that launch should have looked like. It was being launched from a submarine, which is to me, very cool way of launching something into space. And on the right, you see the actual rocket. However, tragically, the rocket failed and the entire payload fell into the sea. So after 6 years of development, that spacecraft never got to fly. It was a just devastating loss for the Planetary Society. So however, at this point, solar sailing had really kind of taken hold in the imaginations of the space science community. And the Japanese space agency, JAXA, launched a successful solar sailing spacecraft named Icarus in 2010. That was deployed from a Venus-bound space probe, and so once it was already well on to space, it deployed and it cruised past Venus and past the Earth. The Planetary Society, though, despite this very sad failure of the Cosmos spacecraft, continued to dream and plan for solar sailing. And in the late 2000s, in 2009, restarted its solar sailing program under the name Lightsail. So this was in part inspired by a move that NASA made where they used a nanosatellite, a cube satellite that would use solar sailing to deorbit itself. So a CubeSat is a very small satellite made up of components that are small boxes, 10 centimeters in each direction, so 10 by 10 by 10 centimeters. So a standard CubeSat is made of 3 boxes, so it's 30 centimeters long and then 10 around. So this is what a CubeSat looks like. This is, in fact, the first Lightsail spacecraft. So when NASA had used sails to deorbit a spacecraft, that was basically just like a parachute rather than a true solar sail. They weren't using the sun's energy to be propelled. They were using sails to create atmospheric drag and pull something out of space. But the Planetary Society thought, hey, if you can fit sails into a CubeSat, maybe this could be the future of solar sailing. So we went about crowdfunding to build the Lightsail 1 spacecraft. So inside this very small spacecraft, you can fit a surprisingly large sail. So of this spacecraft that's about the size of a bread box, you can actually fit a sail that, once it's stretched out, is the size of a boxing ring. So you can see in this picture kind of the scale of that. And then the sail itself is incredibly thin, 1/5000th of an inch thin. So they equate it to like a very thin trash bag, like the kind that would probably rip if you actually used it. And all 4 sections of the sail are folded up within the spacecraft, and then once it's deployed, they extend on 4 booms. So in 2015, we successfully launched the Lightsail 1 spacecraft. It went into low Earth orbit, and it basically just tested whether it could deploy successfully. It wasn't looking to do actual solar sailing at first. It was just looking to deploy. And we got this photo back from it showing that everything had went well. As much as this looks crinkly and bendy, it's actually just the perspective, and the sail extended fully, and it was a total success. So we, of course, Bill Nye, our CEO, celebrated this by following in Carl Sagan's footsteps, going on late night television, this time on the Stephen Colbert Show, to talk to the general public about solar sailing and kind of get people a little bit more excited about this idea. So we went on, after we demonstrated that a CubeSat could successfully deploy a solar sail in space, we went on to build the next spacecraft, Lightsail 2. And this is the one that's launching on Monday from Cape Canaveral as well. So this one is actually going to go into a higher orbit and will demonstrate true solar sailing. So it's going to use the sun's light to accelerate and to change its orbit. Around the time that we launched Lightsail 1, we also launched a Kickstarter to fund Lightsail 2. We had the goal of raising $200,000, and incredibly, and to all of our surprise, we raised over $1,200,000. So this was just a wildly successful fundraiser and allowed us to actually make the Lightsail 2 program possible, because with $200,000 we could have gotten it developed, but what we did not anticipate was that because we were planning on launching on a SpaceX rocket, that we would have to endure very, very long delays from SpaceX's end. And those, it's like sitting in a taxi outside of somewhere and you're waiting, but the meter is still running. The cost of the Lightsail program kept ticking up and up and up. So it was a real lucky stroke that we got to raise this much money in our Kickstarter. It also happens to be the record holder for the most backers of a space project in Kickstarter's history, with over 23,000 backers. And this is what's really cool about Lightsail, is that it's a citizen-funded spacecraft. And this is really unusual, to have spacecraft that aren't made by a government or a company, but are actually funded by people who are passionate about space. And this is one of the quotes that we really liked. This is a project funded by us. We are not backing Lightsail, we are Lightsail. This is one of our Kickstarter backers. And this is the kind of sentiment that we've heard from a lot of the people who supported the program. We also ran a really fun campaign called Selfies to Space, where we reached out to all of our followers on social media and all of our members around the world, asking them to send us a selfie that would be uploaded onto a mini disc and put on the Lightsail 2 spacecraft and sent into space. And we got thousands and thousands of selfies that are all on there waiting to be launched. And it's just another kind of way that we wanted to reach out to the public and get people involved in the excitement of this mission. So we are lucky enough to be launching on the SpaceX Falcon Heavy rocket, which to me is one of the most exciting aspects of this whole thing. You may or may not know that the Falcon Heavy is SpaceX's largest rocket to date, and has the booster rockets and central rocket that all land after launch. So it's one of SpaceX's reusable rockets, and it's just a magnificent thing to witness a launch and landing. I've only seen them on TV, but I'll be there for this one, which is just crazy to me, because it's very, very, very elegant technology. So the launch is, of course, not just taking our tiny CubeSat, it's taking 24 satellites in total, including several other CubeSats. And ours is actually stowed within another spacecraft. So once that is launched, it's called PROX-1, and it's an experimental spacecraft that's looking to test the technology for inspecting other spacecraft in orbit, so to see if they need repair or if they can be deorbited or that kind of thing. I think this is part of trying to declutter space. So we're going to be launched within that spacecraft and then deployed from it, and then it is going to take pictures of Lightsail to see how it works. So it's kind of helping us out by giving us some great images, we're hoping, of our spacecraft in space, but also it's a great way for them to test their technology. So Lightsail 2 is going to be in space for about a year. It'll take a couple of weeks after launch for us to start collecting data from it once it's launched or sort of released from the PROX-1 spacecraft. And we're going to try to demonstrate successful solar sailing by increasing, or changing the spacecraft's orbit, so putting it into a higher orbit through acceleration, and by rotating it within its orbit. So that's the end of my overview of Lightsail. I encourage you guys to jot down this website, sail.planetary.org. It's got tons of great information about solar sailing and about the Lightsail program. And it also has, it'll be showing a live stream of the launch, which is going to take place this coming Monday, quite late at night. It's scheduled for between 11:30 p.m. and 3:30 a.m. So we will be up late, hoping for weather to be in our favor so that this launch can go off. But whether or not this got you excited about Lightsail, I really encourage you to watch the launch, because these rockets in particular are just so exciting to see the launch, and then in particular the landing. So I will end my presentation there. I'm very happy to take questions. I'll come back if I can and end my screen sharing. And anything that you guys want to ask me about Lightsail, about solar sailing, about the Planetary Society, about space in general, I'll do what I can to answer, and happy to take questions.
So, hi Kate, I'm Sandra. Hi. So we have a couple of questions right off the bat, and then we're also going to maybe take a couple of minutes, hand out some question cards so that people can write down things that might have come up during the talk.
Okay.
And then sort of go on from there, if that sounds good to you.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we do have a few that were put in prior to the talk. So the first one is, where could humanity travel with a light sail?
So that's a great question. Really, the possibilities are endless, because once you have something moving through space, there's nothing to slow it down. So if you point it in the right direction, you can get literally anywhere. It's just a matter of how long it takes. So if we wanted to get to the far reaches of our solar system, solar sailing is a great way to do it, because you still have the sun's light. I mean, of course, the sun's light gets weaker and weaker as you get farther away from it, but within the solar system, you would still be getting a slight acceleration all the time. And because acceleration just adds to itself, you would be going faster and faster and faster and eventually reaching incredible speeds. So although solar sails aren't a very viable technology for propelling like a spaceship that carries people, carrying instruments, like scientific instruments and cameras and that kind of thing, to the distant reaches of the solar system is very possible with solar sailing. There's also been talk of using a solar sail to get to the next star system, like the next one over from our solar system, which is something that is, the distances are so vast that it would normally take thousands of years for a standard spacecraft to get there using chemical rockets. But with a solar sail that is at first propelled by the sun's light and then later on has lasers directed at it to propel it further, could conceivably reach Alpha Centauri within hundreds rather than thousands of years. But this is one of the things about space exploration, is that once you start looking beyond our own solar system, you have to be more than just patient. You have to be sort of visionary to know that, our descendants will find the answers about what's out there that we won't be able to find because we'll all be gone by then.
And that actually goes very nicely into the next question, which is how much mass can a light sail realistically propel? And then the sort of relative terms, like a satellite, a colony ship, something like, I mean, obviously you have a CubeSat, so that's very small, but what's the sort of general, larger idea?
So the rule of thumb is that for a bigger spacecraft, you just need a bigger sail. So it really depends on how big your sail could be. So for example, the proposed spacecraft to go to Halley's Comet with solar sailing, they wanted each sail to be 4 miles long. So that's really difficult to build, but it's possible. So ultimately you can build bigger and bigger sails, and particularly if you're building them in space rather than building them on Earth and then launching them and deploying them there. If you're able to build these in space, there's no real limit to how big the payload can be. So you could have, theoretically, you could have an orbiting or a space colony with hundreds of people living on it that is being propelled with solar sails. It's just a matter of actually building a sail big enough. I don't know the specifics of like the ratio of sail size to payload size, and it all depends on how quickly you want to accelerate and everything. But I guess the short answer is that it's all scalable.
So the next question we have is, how is the sail actually deployed from the folded configuration?
So it's pretty cool that the spacecraft itself has booms within it that come out. So it's kind of like a tape measure where you pull it out and it's kind of rolled up inside. And so as those come out, the sail is attached to the boom. So these 4 booms come out with 4 triangular pieces of sail that come out along with them to make altogether a big square. The way that it's folded within the spacecraft is intricate, like origami or something, to make it all fit perfectly and deploy perfectly. And they had to test it, dozens of times on Earth, just in the lab, to make sure that it actually would deploy properly. But that's one of the things that is difficult about this, is getting it packed in just right where it will unfold itself as it deploys.
What's the ratio of like sail to scientific instruments in a CubeSat?
So I would have to look up the numbers, but basically for Lightsail, we don't have a ton of scientific instruments because it's really just testing the technology. But we have a camera and we have a radio to send signals back to Earth about the spacecraft's position in space and whether the sails have deployed properly and that kind of thing. But my guess would be that in a standard CubeSat, the sort of breadbox size thing, you wouldn't have a room for a ton of sophisticated instruments. If you're not going to send something that small to, say, orbit Venus and study it, you're going to want something a little bit bigger. The advantage of a solar sailing CubeSat, or one of the advantages of CubeSats in general, is that because they're very small and they're made of standard components, the sort of body of the spacecraft itself is sort of off the shelf. This makes them accessible to groups that otherwise wouldn't normally be able to do space science. So universities, university labs, small nonprofits like ours, and smaller companies, and even some high school classes, I guess well-funded high schools, have created CubeSat programs, and a lot of space launchers like NASA and SpaceX provide free or very inexpensive launch for student and small nonprofit or small business CubeSats. So the idea is if you can get like even a couple of instruments onto something like this, so whether it's a camera that's going to be pointing back down at Earth, or it's something that's going to be measuring space weather, or any other number of things, if you have a pretty limited scope of the research you want to do, and you can have a very, very small instrument, you can fit that on a CubeSat that also has a sail within it.
And then we have a question about slowing down, because you mentioned acceleration. Is there a way to slow a light sail down once it's reached a destination?
That's a good question. I don't know off the top of my head, but just kind of thinking it through, I would say that it would be a matter of tacking so that the sun is not just pushing directly towards it. I think it also depends on what your destination is. So if you are looking to arrive at, say, Pluto, you would maybe use the gravitational pull of planets on your way to Pluto, or even Pluto itself, to adjust the trajectory. I'm not an expert in orbital mechanics, and it's a complicated field, but I will say that I expect it's possible. It's a good question. I don't have a solid answer. For Lightsail, it's easy because it's still within low Earth orbit, like low enough that it'll get slowed down by the remnants of atmosphere that are still out there. I mean, it's not thick atmosphere, but there's enough of it that it'll slow it down. But if you're going somewhere far more distant and you need to pick up tons of speed, I mean, I know that other spacecraft like New Horizons that went to Pluto, when you get that far, you're going so fast you can't really fully slow down. So you do a flyby rather than entering into orbit. So like New Horizons passed Pluto, did a bunch of science as it was passing by, and then just kept zooming on out, and you can't really slow down at that point.
So then we have two questions about your work specifically. One is, do you actually work directly on the light sail?
No, I don't. I work in the public outreach and education side of things. So I prepare resources for other people to learn about Lightsail, but this is why I don't have all of the technical details about it, because for most people who want to talk about this mission, the sort of bigger picture of the story is enough. So most of my knowledge of Lightsail is sort of on that level. So I prepare, like the presentation that I sent you is something that we have made available to volunteers and members of the Planetary Society if they want to go teach their communities about Lightsail. And I've worked on writing things about it for our website and that kind of thing. But the actual technical experts are not me.
And how long have you actually been with the Planetary Society?
I've been with the Planetary Society for 6 years now. I think it was actually my work anniversary just the other day, LinkedIn told me, so it's been 6 years. And yeah, most of that time has been spent doing sort of program development, so mostly building up our presence in Canada, our relationship with the Canadian government, but then also developing better ways to engage volunteers and starting this new program that is reaching out to youth to get kids excited about space and about learning science.
Cool. I think we have another question being written at the moment. 1 second.
I can just ask it.
You just ask it.
Sure. Are solar sails practical for orbiting satellites, or are they sort of primarily useful as propulsion for spacecraft we want to send to other places?
They're great for both. So for an orbiting satellite, a solar sail can keep it from decreasing its orbit, because normally if you